When was the hymn written, David?
That's 400 AD was that something around 400 AD by Roman Christian living in Spain.
So there you go. We have been part of a tradition of praise 1,600 years. People have been singing that hymn. And I don't know, perhaps it's because I'm getting older. I sort of feel that link into the great heritage of faith that we have when we join in a hymn like that. And we know that there's countless saints that have sung that over the centuries. And yeah, we're numbered amongst the saints. We're numbered amongst God's people. That's amazing. What is also amazing is our next reading. It comes from Isaiah, the book of Isaiah. These readings that we have on Sundays are all organized by some committee. I don't know when these were, but it's called a lectionary. And there's readings given for every Sunday throughout the year. So we don't just pick what we happen to think is a good idea. These are readings that are being shared across the world today. So not only are we linked across time, we're linked across the world in one great family of God's people. And one of the readings for today was from Isaiah in chapter 12. And just by way of an introduction, not necessarily to chapter 12, but to the book of Isaiah, which is an amazing book. It's probably 2 or 3 parts that are brought together into one book that we know as Isaiah. In the early part, it talks about Assyria. And in the latter part, it talks about coming back from exile at Babylon. What we don't always realize is that there's 300 years in that, between those endpoints. The year that King Uzziah died. Do you know that chapter 6? In the year that King Uzziah died, I was seated in the temple. This great vision that he has. Well, Uzziah died 739 BC. And then later on, Isaiah talks about Cyrus. And Cyrus wasn't around until 444 BC. So that gives you a span of the time of the book of Isaiah. And we've got it very nicely in a book. We can turn the pages over, but in Jesus' day and before, and for a little while after, but not too long, everything was written down in scrolls. This is a picture of the scroll that was found at Qumran in 1947. It's Isaiah. It is 24 feet long. You imagine trying to find Isaiah 53 when they give you the scroll. For a start, it weighs a ton. Costs a fortune. Can you imagine this? I can't remember now how many skins that were in that sewn together to make up that scroll. But it's hugely expensive. I did try and find out how much it cost to buy a scroll of Isaiah now. The only thing I could find was the cost of a scroll of Esther. But you know how long Esther is, and that's £500. So just imagine a proper scroll. Liz and I have seen a scribe at work writing out scrolls for use in synagogues. And it's painstaking. They must cost thousands of pounds. And Jesus knew this book. That is quite clear from his ministry and the things that he said. He knew Isaiah. There was money in Nazareth if they could afford a copy of the scroll of Isaiah. And Jesus obviously had time and expertise to read it. He knew it. There was money in Nazareth for that. one little side issue on that is it makes me wonder how much of our Old Testament Jesus knew. Because the Old Testament, as we have it, wasn't formed until about 100 years after Jesus died. So they had collections of sacred writings that were divided into law, prophets, and writings. And Jesus probably had more than what is in our Old Testament. And some of the things seem to indicate he was referring to things outside our Old Testament. We don't know what they are. Oh dear. People still needed to dig up, to find, and to translate. And just as another final footnote, because it's of relevance, is that the chapters and verses that we have in our Bibles weren't put in until much later. They're not there in the original scrolls. They're not there in the original Greek texts. They're much, much, much later edition. So where we have some chapter divisions and verse divisions, they are artificial, which is why we have to, if we've got passage, we need to read a little bit before and a little bit after and see if they actually are all part of the same thing. And so that brings us to Isaiah chapter 12, and the given reading is verses 2 through to 6. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the well of salvation. In that day you will say, give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. For some reason, the screen didn't move on. There we go, we've got it going now. About 6 weeks ago, I had some inside information that the Messiah's coming. Well, it's about Advent, and we believe in the coming of the Messiah. So anyway, this was about the Messiah's coming again. So last night, Liz and I found ourselves at Norwich Cathedral for the Messiah, which came there again. And we were involved in the techie team with candles and making sure that everything was all right and they didn't burn out. There's not a lot we could do about the ones that did during the performance, but it was great. Yes, the Messiah came again to Norwich last night. But that's not the sense in which we talk about the coming of the Messiah. At the time when Jesus was born, there was a great expectation that the Messiah was going to come. There were other people who came claiming to be Messiah. And there was always a question of, is this person the Messiah or not? And we get clues of that in our New Testament, one of which is at the end of the Gospel according to John, chapter 20, not quite the last chapter, where it says, Jesus did loads of things apart from what's recorded in this book, but what is recorded here is enough for you to know that Jesus is the Messiah. So there were other people. There were people before Jesus and there were people after Jesus who claimed to be the Messiah. There was a great expectation. Do you remember that kind of feeling around at the time of the millennium? That actually things were going to get better, things were going to change. There was a general feeling across the country, wasn't there? And it was that kind of thing that expected the Messiah to come. And Isaiah and Jeremiah and Malachi and other prophets at the time when the people came back from exile in Babylon knew that God was going to send the Messiah. They looked forward to that coming of the Messiah. Didn't know when it would be, but they expected the Messiah to come. They expected God would act. And this was a great source of joy to them. Perhaps the expectation that God would act and things would be better was because of the kind of person Herod the Great was. An absolute despot that people were scared stiff of what he was going to do now. His first name wasn't Boris. It was said that it was safer to be a pig in the temple than to be Herod's son. You just think of how Jews react to pigs. Put that pig in the temple, that pig wouldn't survive more than a few seconds. But that was how people felt about him. And there was the expectation that God was going to do something. And they realized that there was nowhere else that they were going to get that salvation. Salvation is in God alone. In a dry land, how many of you have been to Israel? Two apart from me. It's incredibly hot, isn't it? And it's incredibly dry. In the story of the Good Samaritan, we starts off about the road that runs from Jerusalem to Jericho. 17 miles long, and it descends in height from the equivalent of the top of Snowdon down to the deepest point that we have on our Earth's crust. So it's downhill all the way. I walked half of it, and it's the toughest walk I have ever done. We started on a point where we joined the path, that ancient path, same path that Jesus would have used, at just after 6 in the morning. And we got to Jericho at 11. And it was just totally exhausting. We'd taken the amount of water with us that we were advised, and I would think it was about half what we needed. They say that for somebody like us, who live in a wet country, to go out there, you can survive out there a few hours. That's it. If you haven't got water with you, you will die. Now, if you live out there, your body learns to cope with that. But water out there is a commodity of blessing. So no wonder when they are talking about the joy of salvation, they liken it to pulling water out of a well, because it's the greatest of blessings. Amazing to find water in the dry. There's only 7 rivers in Israel that don't run dry. And some of those are only tiny little sort of what we call a brook. Water is amazingly important. And what Isaiah reminds us is that salvation is as important as that. And the joy that comes with salvation is the same as the joy of someone in the desert finding water in a dry land. the ultimate gift of salvation is the gift that we celebrate. We've got one candle left, so that's one Sunday left before Christmas. But here is the ultimate gift of salvation that God has given to us. It's salvation in Jesus, our ultimate joy. Joy is not the same as happiness. I always think that joy is something that wells up from inside. And happiness is something that happens from the outside. Maybe we are not feeling desperately joyful inside, but a good joke would make us laugh. Let me share with you a story about the painting on the front of the church here that we just had done. And it looks very nice, doesn't it? And it looks very nice, doesn't it? And as all scaffolding was out and the painter was there, and I thought, oh, it's not too bad. I might get away with putting a bit of water in the paint. Putting water in the paint. Put a bit more water in, make it go a bit further. I can save myself a bob or two. Then he gets down to the bottom and it's not very good at all. And suddenly a voice thunders down from heaven, repaint, repaint, and thin no more. Now we can bubble with laughter, even if down inside we're not feeling desperately joyful. But as Christians, we have a joy that is a well within us, regardless of whether we are happy. We can have that Christmas joy. We prayed just now for Graham. I wonder if he's feeling happy. But he can feel joyful because he knows that God has sent his Son for salvation for us. He knows that his wife of 70 years is encompassed in God's love, and that in God's time, so will he be. And they will be united together forever in that eternal kingdom. He may not feel happy. And there's lots and lots and lots of people across the world who won't feel happy at Christmas. But they can still be joyful. They can still come to that well of salvation. They can still come to the child in the manger. Because of Christmas, we can truly rejoice in the Lord always. And rejoicing is not about having a nice, cozy feeling. It's about a way of living, the way of the kingdom. Hence, John the Baptist and his call to righteous living. Charles was talking about it a couple of weeks ago. You don't need me to say anything on that. But it is about living out that way of the kingdom that roots us in the joy of kingdom life. Now, I'm having a problem with my computer, for which I apologize. And in a few seconds, we'll be back there. I hope. Come on. Just remind you of everything we've done so far in the service. Advent gives us time to prepare for Christmas, that coming at Bethlehem. The story of the shepherds, wise men, and all the rest of it that goes to make up that time. But Advent also should prepare us for the second coming. Jesus is yet to come again. And so we still look for the coming of the Messiah. If we want to have true joy, we will come to the manger and draw on that well of salvation that is found in Christ alone. And if that drawing of water, as it were, strengthens us, enables us to live the way of the kingdom, those things John the Baptist was talking about, then we will be rejoicing at the time of the second coming. But if we don't live the way of the kingdom, then the time of the second coming is going to be a bit worrying for us. We're not going to know that joy. We're not going to find that event of the coming again of Christ, a time that brings us happiness. So just the same as some people will find this Christmas an unhappy time, and some people do not know the joy of salvation, so it will be again at the coming of the Son of Man, that some people will find it a happy time, and some people will be upheld by the joy that they have in them, and some won't, because it's not there. But that is their choice. That is their choice. If we want to have true joy, we will come to the manger and we will live the way of the kingdom. And that will give us joy on the day of Christ. And here's my promise, and you can tell me if it doesn't happen. It will give us joy every day of our lives. We're going to share in a little prayer that includes this sung response of, "O Lord, hear my prayer." It's a prayer come meditation written by the Wild Goose community. How many have come across the Wild Goose community? 1, 2, 3 in the front row. Okay. Wild Goose, Celtic image of the Holy Spirit. Wild Goose community, worship community, is part of the Iona community that was revived in the early part of the 20th century. And there's a group of people that produce worship material. They actually live and work and do their stuff in Glasgow. How many of you heard of John Bell? Yeah, if you've heard of John Bell, he's part of this community. And it's a prayer called "When the World Was Dark." Let's be quiet before the Lord. When the world was dark and the city was quiet, you came. You crept in beside us. And no one knew only the few who dared to believe that God might do something different. Will you do the same this Christmas, Lord? Will you come into the darkness of today's world? Not the friendly darkness as when sleep rescues us from tiredness, but the fearful darkness in which people have stopped believing that war will end or food will come or that a government will change or the church cares. Will you come into that darkness and do something different to save your people from death and despair? O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me. Will you come into the quietness of Southwold? Not the friendly quietness as when lovers hold hands, but the fearful silence when the phone has not rung, when the letter has not come, and the friendly voice no longer speaks. The doctor's face says it all. Will you come into that darkness and do something different? Not to distract, but to embrace your people. O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me. And will you come into the dark corners and the quiet places of our lives? We ask this not because we're guilt-ridden or want to be, but because the fullness our lives long for depends on us being as open and as vulnerable to you as you were to us when you came wearing no more than nappies and trusting human hands to hold their maker. Will you come into our lives if we open them to you and do something different? O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. When I call, answer me. O Lord, hear my prayer. O Lord, hear my prayer. Come and listen to me. When the world was dark and the city was quiet, you came. You crept in beside us. Do the same this Christmas, Lord. Do the same this Christmas. Amen. And so to our closing hymn. Joy to the world, the Lord is come. blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, rest and rule with you and everyone today and throughout your lives. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Here's
Pardon?